My sister leaned over my hospital bed, close enough that I could smell the coffee on her breath, and whispered, "You were always the spare one," then walked out with the donor match that had my name on it. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my grandmother had already sealed something inside an envelope and written 6 words across the front: "Open only when they come asking." 2 winters later, in a conference room 90 minutes north of Cardwell, a surgeon would read one name off a donor list, and it would be mine. And our mother would fold down onto the gray carpet like somebody had cut her strings. I didn't know any of that yet. That night, I just lay there and didn't make a sound. My name is Carly Brandt. I was 28, and I read blood for a living. Clinical lab scientist, third shift, at the hospital that serves the farm towns off State Road 9. 3 days before my sister leaned over that bed, I had caught a cross-match 2 other techs already signed off and labeled wrong. I didn't announce it. I read it slow, twice, the way I read everything, and I fixed it before it could reach a patient. Third shift is just me and the hum of the analyzers and the cold coming off the sample fridge. I like it that way. Blood does not lie to you, and it does not ask you for money. That is the thing about me my family never wanted to look at straight. I don't raise my voice. I keep the record straight. So when Whitney walked out of that room, I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I reached over to the little rolling tray by the bed, picked up my copy of the paperwork, and folded it into the pocket of the gown. Whatever else they took that week, they were not going to take the proof that it happened. But this story really starts about a year before that hospital room, back home in Cardwell, Indiana. 4,000 people, one stoplight that matters, and a hardware store on Main with a green awning that everybody for 20 miles knew by sight. That store was my father's. Dale Brandt ran the register up front. My mother, Maureen, ran the books in the back. And both of them ran on the same quiet belief they never said out loud, that my older sister was the one going somewhere, and I was the one who would stay and hold the rest of it together while she went. I was the second daughter, which in our family was less a birth order than a job description. Whitney came 4 years ahead of me, and she came out shining. Homecoming court, the good scholarships, the kind of laugh that made grown men at the store hand her things for free. I came out useful. There is a difference, and I learned it early. And I was useful. That is not me being bitter. That is just the ledger. When the store's water heater died, I covered it. When Whitney needed first and last month on an apartment up in Indianapolis, I wrote the check and never saw a dime of it come back. I covered shifts at the lab and then drove the 90 minutes north whenever somebody needed a ride to something. For 19 months, I quietly paid down a credit card that had my sister's purchases on it and my name on the account. Nobody ever asked me to stop, so I didn't. I remember my 16th birthday because it landed the same week Whitney made regionals in track. My mother baked one cake. It said, "Good luck, Whitney," in blue icing, and at dinner she slid it to the middle of the table and told me there was ice cream in the freezer if I wanted to celebrate too. I wasn't angry. I was 16 and already trained. I got the bowls down for everybody and I scooped. That is who I was in that house, the one who got the bowls down. In a town the size of Cardwell, the Brandts were good people, and everybody knew it. Dale would carry your lumber to the truck himself. Maureen ran the church rummage sale every spring. At the diner on Linden Street, my family had a reputation polished smooth over 30 years, and I was a quiet line item inside it. The useful daughter. Nobody at that counter had the first idea what the Brandts were willing to do to one of their own behind that green awning. Not yet. That came later. And when it came, it was all anybody on Linden could talk about. Then the winter I turned 28, my own body handed in its notice. My kidneys were failing. The doctors said it plain, the numbers were bad and getting worse, and I was looking at a transplant or a lifetime tied to a machine 3 days a week. I did what I always did. I made a plan, I kept working, and I didn't make it anybody's problem. The only person who refused to treat it like a quiet inconvenience was my grandmother. Ruth Brandt had spent 31 years as a dialysis nurse before she retired, so she had watched more people wait on more lists than anyone in that county. She was not about to watch me do it. Lists are for people without family willing to work, she told me, in her kitchen, with her hand flat on the table. Then she went and did the work herself. Ruth found me a donor, a living one. A directed donation, they call it, where one person gives to one named person and nobody else. He was a man from her old church, 2 towns over. His blood and tissue lined up with mine. He had heard my grandmother brag about me at a potluck and said yes before she finished asking. She drove me up to the transplant program herself. She sat in the waiting room with her purse square on her knees. A coordinator named Gwen Dietrich walked me through every form, every box, every signature. The gift had my name on it, on paper, in a file with a date on the front. The afternoon it was all approved, Ruth pressed something into my hands in the parking garage. An envelope, sealed, heavier than an envelope ought to be. 6 words across the front in her shaky print, open only when they come asking. I asked her what it meant. She just folded my fingers shut over it and said, "You'll know the day, and not one day before." I put it in my glove box and figured she was being dramatic. My grandmother was almost never dramatic. I should have paid more attention to that. I never made it to that surgery. Somewhere in those weeks, while I was getting sicker and waiting on a date, my sister's kidneys were failing too. Quieter than mine, but failing. And somewhere in there, my parents made a decision they never once said to my face. They decided the gift Ruth found should go to Whitney instead. Here is what I knew in that hospital bed, and here is what I did not. I knew the donor Ruth found for me had been moved over to my sister. I knew the surgery that was supposed to be mine was now hers, down the hall, already prepped. What I did not know yet, what it would take me 2 more winters to hold in my own hands, was exactly how they had done it on paper. In the moment, sick and slow, all I had was the shape of the thing. I asked Gwen Dietrich one question. I asked her whether a directed gift could even be moved like that, from one name to another. She looked at me for a long moment, and she said, "Not the way it's supposed to work." Then somebody called her name from the hall, and she was gone. That was when Whitney came in wearing her coat, already cleared, already prepped, and leaned down close enough for the coffee. "You were always the spare one." She said it gently, like she was doing me a favor, telling me where I stood. My mother stood in the doorway and would not come past it. When I looked at her, all she gave me was, "Whitney has the girls to think about, Carly. You've only ever had yourself." Like that settled it. Like having nobody depend on me made me the obvious one to go without. I didn't argue. Don't read that as weakness. I knew that system better than anybody standing in that hallway, and I could have named 6 rules they had just bent or broken right there on the spot. Instead, I asked the floor nurse for a full copy of my chart and my consent history, and I folded it away with the first page. I don't raise my voice. I keep the record straight. It is the only thing I have ever truly been good at, and it turned out to be the only thing that mattered. They sent me back to the White House on Sumac Street to recover from a surgery I never had. I did not stay long. I found a 1-bedroom over the laundromat on Linden, close enough to walk to the diner, and I stopped. I stopped covering the card. I stopped writing the checks. I wasn't taking anything back from them. I was just done carrying it, Then I went back to the only road still open to me. I got myself listed the regular way, the slow way, the way Ruth hated. 11,000 people were ahead of me on that list the day I signed on. I learned not to look at the number. I found another way to stay alive. It was slow, and it was lonely, and it worked. I will leave the machines and the waiting rooms out of this. That part is between me and a few good nurses. I survived the winter my own family had quietly bet that I would not. Ruth did not get to see it. She passed that February, easy, in her own bed, with the kitchen radio still playing down the hall. I was holding her hand. Near the end, she pulled my ear down close and said one last thing about that envelope. "Don't you open it to feel better," she said. "You open it when they come asking, not before." Then she patted the back of my hand twice, the way she always had, and she let go. After the funeral, I went back to my bench, because the bench is where I make sense of things. Typing blood, matching tissue, filing donation consent forms with the donor names blacked out in heavy marker, the way the rules require, so the giver and the getter never have to carry each other's faces. I had handled 1,000 of those forms. I had no idea that one of them already had my whole family's fingerprints pressed into it. It was sitting in an archive 90 minutes north, waiting 2 winters for me to finally look. For 2 winters, nobody came asking. The envelope sat in a shoebox on the top shelf of my closet, and some weeks I forgot the exact words on the front. I built a small life, a quiet one, and I started to believe quiet was all it was ever going to be. Then, on a Tuesday in February, almost 2 years to the day, my phone lit up on the counter with my mother's name. First time in 2 years. I stood there and watched it ring. Up on that closet shelf, in a shoebox, in my grandmother's shaky hand, 6 words were finally about to mean something. They were coming asking. I let it ring out the first time, not out of spite, out of arithmetic. I stood at the counter in my 1 bedroom over the laundromat on Linden, and I counted the rings the way I count anything I don't trust. Slow, all the way to 6, and when the screen went dark, I waited to see if she would leave a message. She did. My mother never left messages. Maureen believed a voicemail was a thing you left for people who owed you a callback, and she had spent my whole life certain she owed me nothing. The message was 9 seconds long. "Carly, it's your mother. We need you to call back tonight. It's important. It's about your sister." Then a breath, and the part she could not keep out of her voice, the part that told me everything before a single fact did. "Please." Maureen did not say please. In 28 years, I could count the times on one hand and still have fingers to spare. So I knew, standing there with the radiator ticking and the dryers rumbling through the floor from the laundromat below, that something on Sumac Street had finally walked into a wall it could not charm and could not borrow its way around. I called back. "I'm not going to dress it up and tell you I made her wait a week, that I let it ring on their end the way they had let it ring on mine. That isn't who I am, and pretending would just be its own kind of lie." I called back that same night. Whatever else Ruth failed to teach the rest of them, she taught me to answer the phone. My father picked up. That alone was strange. Dale Brandt did not work telephones. Dale worked the register and the lumber yard and the silence at the dinner table, and he left the talking to my mother. But it was his voice that came through, lower than I remembered, sanded down at the edges. "Carly," he said. "Thanks for calling back, sweetheart." Sweetheart. He had not called me that since I was small enough to ride in the cart at the store. Then Maureen took the phone, because of course she did, and she laid it out the way she laid out everything, like a fact already settled that I was being generously allowed to hear. Whitney was sick again. The transplant from 2 winters ago, the one that was supposed to fix everything, was failing. The word they used was rejection, though they did not seem to understand it the way I did. Sitting there with my eyes closed, translating their panic back into the language I read for a living. Her body was turning on the gift it had been given. The numbers were bad. She was back on the list, and the list, as my grandmother used to say, is for people without family willing to work. So we're asking family, my mother said. We're asking you to get tested, Carly. You're her sister. You might match. I did not say anything right away. I have learned that the people who are most afraid of a silence will rush to fill it, and they will tell you things they never meant to. So I let it sit. And into that quiet, my mother poured the rest, and the rest was the same song they had been singing over me my whole life, just with the words rearranged. Whitney had the girls. Whitney had so much to live for. Whitney had people who needed her. And well, I had always been so strong, so capable, so good at managing on my own. I had only ever had myself, she said, like it was a compliment. Like the loneliness they had built around me brick by brick was a convenience they were now entitled to spend. You're the one who could do this, she said. You've always been the one who could carry things. There it was. The whole shape of my family in one sentence. I was the one who could carry things, so I would be the one made to carry this. I asked one question, just one, and I asked it flat, in the voice I use across a counter when somebody's labeled a tube wrong and I need them to walk me back through what they did without getting defensive. Did the program ask you to call me? I said, or did you decide that on your own? There was a pause on the line, a small one. But I read small pauses the way I read a cross match, slow and twice, and I knew the answer before she gave it. We're handling it as a family, Maureen said, which meant the program had not sent them, which meant somebody at that transplant center in Indianapolis had not yet typed Whitney's own sister into the system as the obvious next call, which meant there was a reason they hadn't, a reason sitting in a file 90 minutes north that my parents were praying nobody would open. I told them I would think about it. My mother did not like that. She had called expecting either a yes or a fight, and I gave her neither. I gave her a closed door with no handle on her side. Carly, she started, and I said good night. Mom, tell Dad good night. And I set the phone face down on the counter, and I stood there in the noise of the dryers for a long time. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be clear about what it actually felt like. It felt like standing at my bench at 3 in the morning and pulling a result that does not reconcile, that number that should match the number above it and does not, and feeling the floor of your certainty drop an inch. Because for 2 winters, I had told myself a story. The story was that my family had made a cruel choice between 2 sick daughters, an ugly, human, indefensible choice. But a choice. A list. Bad luck dressed up as fairness. And something in my mother's careful little pause had just told me the story was wrong. There had been no list. There had been a gift with my name on it, and a hand that took it. I don't raise my voice. I keep the record straight. So I went and found the record. I still had my own copy from that night in the hospital. The chart and the consent history I had folded into the pocket of a gown and never let out of my sight. I spread it across my kitchen table under the one good lamp, and I read it the way I read everything, the way Ruth used to read a label before she would hang a single bag, like the paper might be lying and it was my job to catch it. The directed donation. The donor worked up 2 towns over, off State Road 9, the same county roads Ruth had driven me down. The blood type, the tissue markers, the date the gift was approved and matched, in writing, to one name, Carly Brandt. Mine. It was right there, exactly the way Gwen Dietrich had walked me through it in that little office, box by box. And then a second set of pages I had barely looked at 2 winters ago, because 2 winters ago I had been too sick and too gutted to do anything but file them away. A reassignment. A redirection of a directed gift from one named recipient to another, from Carly Brandt to Whitney Brandt, and a signature on the consent line authorizing the change. I sat with that page under the lamp for a long time, and the lab scientist in me did what she does. She read it slow. Then she read it twice. A directed donation is the one kind of gift in that whole system that is not supposed to move. That is the entire point of it. A stranger does not give a kidney to a list when they direct it. They give it to a person, by name, because they decided that person and no one else. To move it, to redirect it to a different recipient, you do not just need a form. You need the donor to agree, in writing, to give to the new person instead. You need the donor's consent. And on that page, on the line where the donor's authorization belonged, was a signature. I had seen the donor's real signature. It was on the original consent, the first stack, the night Ruth drove me up. And the name written on the redirection did not move the way that man's hand moved. The loops were wrong. The pressure was wrong. Too even. Too careful. The way a thing is careful when it is being copied instead of written. And the date stamped on the redirection sat out of sequence with the page it claimed to follow. The kind of small impossibility that happens when somebody backdates a thing to make a story hold. Records that do not reconcile are the only thing I have ever truly understood. A forgery is just a record that does not reconcile with the truth, and reconciling records is the whole of my trade. The donor's name itself was blacked out on the copies, the way the rules require, so the giver and the getter never carry each other's faces. A heavy bar of marker, the same kind I had drawn across 1,000 forms at my own bench, without once thinking that one of them might have my family's fingerprints pressed into it. But I did not need the name. I had handled that man's file myself, back when his blood and tissue came through the lab that serves our farm towns, because he was local and his workup ran through us. I knew his type. I knew his markers the way you know a phone number you dialed every week for a year, and the redacted line on that page, the date, the county, the type, it all fit one man, the man from Ruth's old church, the one who heard my grandmother brag about me at a potluck and said yes before she finished asking. He had said yes to me, and somewhere between his yes and my surgery, somebody had drawn a careful copied signature onto a redirection form and turned his gift to me into a gift to my sister, and then walked into my hospital room smelling of coffee to tell me I had always been the spare. I photographed every page, front and back, in good light, flat on the table, a coin set beside each one for scale the way you document anything you might one day have to prove. Then I did the thing I should have been too tired to do and was not. I drove 90 minutes north the next morning on my day off, with the photographs on my phone and the originals in a folder on the passenger seat, and I asked the front desk at the transplant program for the one person I trusted in that whole building. Gwen Dietrich. She came out to the waiting room herself. 2 winters older, the same square way of carrying herself, and when she saw my face, something in her own went still. She remembered me. Of course she remembered me. "Carly," she said, "I wondered if you'd ever come back here." We sat in the same small office with the same gray light, and I put the redirection page on the desk between us, and I asked her the question I had asked her once before, in a hallway, while my sister was being prepped down the hall, whether a directed gift could be moved like that from one name to another. And this time she did not get called away. Gwen looked at the page for a long moment. She did not pick it up. She looked at it the way I had looked at it, like it might bite. I flagged this, she said quietly. 2 winters ago. I flagged it as soon as it crossed my desk because it wasn't right. The timing wasn't right. And a directed donation does not just change recipients on a Tuesday. She folded her hands. I was told the donor had a change of heart. I was given a signed consent. I escalated it anyway, and I was told the family had it handled, and the surgery was already moving, and I was new enough then that handled was a word I still believed. She finally looked up at me. I kept the file, Carly, the original. I have kept that file in my own drawer for 2 years because some part of me never believed handled. I think I was keeping it for the day somebody walked back in here and asked me the right question. I told her I thought the signature on the redirection was not real. I told her why, the loops, the pressure, the date that sat out of sequence. And Gwen Dietrich, who had been deceived once and had spent 2 winters refusing to forgive herself for it, reached into her drawer and laid the original directed donation file down next to my photographs. And the 2 records sat there on the desk telling 2 different stories, and only one of them could be true. If you're right, she said slowly, this doesn't just touch your sister's place on the list. This is a forged donor authorization. That's not a family matter anymore. That goes to review. She let that settle. You understand what you'd be opening. I understood better than anyone in that building. I had spent 2 years not opening it. And on the top shelf of a closet over a laundromat on Linden Street, in a shoebox, in my grandmother's shaking hand, 6 words had been waiting the whole time for somebody to finally come asking. The drive back to Cardwell took the 90 minutes it always took, State Road 9 running flat and gray between the stubble fields, the grain elevators standing up out of the haze like the only tall thing left in that part of the state. I did not turn on the radio. I drove with both hands on the wheel and Gwen Dietrich's question riding shotgun where the folder had been. You understand what you'd be opening. I did. I had understood it before she said it. A directed gift does not move. A forged authorization is not a family quarrel you settle over pie. And once a thing like that is read out loud in the right room, it does not go back in the envelope it came from. The envelope. I thought about it the whole way down, past the turnoff for the county roads Ruth used to take me on, past the Cardwell water tower with the town's name half weathered off the side, past Dale's hardware store on Main with the lights off because it was a Sunday, and even now my father closed on Sundays. I came up Linden and parked behind the laundromat and climbed the outside stairs to my one room over the dryers, and I did not take my coat off. I went straight to the closet and reached up to the top shelf and took down the shoebox. I had not opened it in 2 winters. I had moved it once when I painted the bedroom, carried it from one shelf to another with both hands like it was full of something that could spill. Inside was a church bulletin from Ruth's funeral, a pair of her reading glasses, and the envelope, manila, soft at the corners now from being handled by a woman whose hands had stopped being steady at the end. Across the front, in her writing, the letters leaning the way they leaned in her last year were 6 words. Open only when they come asking. They had come asking. Maureen's voice on a Tuesday in February. Please. The word she never used. I sat down at the kitchen table under the one good lamp, the same lamp I had read the forged redirection under 3 nights before, and I slid my thumb under the flap and broke a seal my grandmother had licked and pressed shut with her own mouth before she died. I want you to understand I did not tear it. I opened it the way I open everything, slow, like the contents might be evidence, because as it turned out, they were. There were 3 things inside. The first was a card, a tissue typing card, the small laminated kind the program issues, with a name printed across the top and a string of markers underneath it. The HLA loci laid out in their neat columns the way I lay out 100 of them a week at my bench. The name on the card was mine, Carly Brandt. And the date stamped in the corner was from the spring before Ruth died, a full year before any of this, a year before Whitney got sick the first time, before there was a list or a gift or a man from church saying yes at a potluck. My grandmother had had me typed. She had done it quietly, the way she did everything in that last year, the way a retired dialysis nurse knows how to walk a person through a blood draw and a tissue workup without ever once saying the word that would scare them. I tried to remember it, and I could. A morning at the clinic in town that she called a checkup. Her holding my arm down on the armrest with 2 fingers the way she'd held 1,000 arms. A nurse she knew by first name. "Sit still, Carly. It's nothing. You've had worse hangnails." I had thought it was nothing. It was this. The second thing was a single sheet from the program, 90 Minutes North, the same registry that ran through Gwen Dietrich's office. It confirmed that the markers on the card had been entered, logged, dated, and kept, not as a recipient, as a donor. My grandmother had not just found out what I was made of. She had put it on the record where it could not be lost, could not be redirected, could not be drawn onto a different page in somebody's careful copied hand. She had registered the spare part. She had filed me where the truth files things. I sat with the card in one hand and the registry sheet in the other, and I did the only thing I know how to do with 2 records. I read them against each other. Then I read them against a third record that was not on the table at all, because I did not need it on the table. I had handled my own family's typing. I knew Whitney's markers the way you know the shape of your own front door in the dark. I had run them, and I laid my type beside hers in my head, locus by locus, the way I would lay any 2 strangers side by side at 3 in the morning to tell a coordinator yes or no, and the columns came up the way columns come up, maybe once in a family, maybe once in a long, unlucky family with 2 daughters and one of them already used up. We matched, closer than 2 sisters have any right to, closer than the man from church had ever matched me. I did not gasp. I did not put a hand over my mouth the way people do in the kind of story where they want you to feel something. I set the card down, squared its edge against the registry sheet until the 2 of them lined up flush, and I got up and put the kettle on, because my hands wanted something to do, and the truth had just walked into my kitchen and sat down like it owned the chair. For 2 winters, they had built their whole hope on the idea that when the day came, they could ask the strong one to get tested, and the strong one would roll up her sleeve, and the testing would take its weeks, and they would hold their breath through the workup the way you hold your breath through anything you are not sure of. They did not know the testing was done. They did not know it had been done before Whitney's first surgery, by a woman in support hose who never told a soul. They were going to walk into that program asking the universe for a miracle, not knowing the miracle had already been typed, dated, and shelved over a laundromat on Linden Street, waiting on 6 words. The kettle started to tick on the burner. I went back to the table and picked up the 3rd thing in the envelope, and the 3rd thing was the letter. It was 2 pages, both sides, in pencil, because pen had gotten hard for her at the end, and pencil she could lean into. I am not going to read you all of it. Some of it was just Ruth, the price of eggs, and a complaint about the choir director, and a line about how the dog 2 houses down still barked at her like she was new in town after 30 years. But I will give you the part that mattered, the part I have read so many times the pencil is starting to ghost off the page where my thumb sits. "Carly," she wrote, "if you are reading this, it is because they finally need something only you have, and they have come to your door with that family voice on, the one that asks you for the moon and calls it your duty. You know the voice. I raised the woman who uses it. So listen to your grandmother one more time. I found you a man with a good heart and the right blood, and he said yes to you, freely, by name, because I asked him to and because you are worth asking for. What they did with that yes is not yours to carry and never was. I have watched this family spend you like you were small bills, your whole life, a little here and a little there, and call it love because love is what they call the things they take. I am old and I am a nurse, and I have seen which kidney fails and which one holds. And I will tell you what I have known since you were small. You were never the spare. You were the strongest thing in that house, and they needed you weak to keep the story straight. So I did the one thing I could still do. I had you typed, and I had you registered, and I sealed it where they could not get to it, so that on the day they come asking, you would not be standing there empty-handed and grateful for the chance to bleed for them again. You would be standing there holding the truth. What you do with it is yours. Give it or keep it. Save her or don't. I will not be there to tell you, and I would not tell you if I were. I only wanted you to choose it as a whole person and not as a part they unscrewed. You were never the spare. Sign it, the rest of them. Burn this if you need to. I love you the most, and I never once pretended different. Grandma Ruth. I folded the letter back along the creases she had put in it, and I drank the tea I did not remember pouring, and I sat in that quiet over the dryers for a long time while the radiator ticked and the streetlight on Linden came on outside the window. I was not angry the way you would think. The anger had burned off 2 winters ago and left this behind, this clear, cold thing that is harder than anger and lasts longer. I understood, finally and completely, what had been done and what I held. Here is the thing I want on the record, because it is the only thing in this whole business I am proud of. I did not decide to save my sister, and I did not decide to let her go. Not that night. That night I decided something smaller and harder. I decided I would not be drawn from. I would not be the part somebody reaches for in a drawer and uses and puts back. If I gave anything, I would give it standing up, with my name on the giving, in a room with the lights on and the truth already spoken. I don't raise my voice. I keep the record straight. And the record now had 2 stories in it, the true one and the forged one, and only one of them was going to be read out loud. I wasn't taking anything back. I was just done carrying it. I called Gwen Dietrich the next morning before my shift. I told her I had opened something my grandmother left me, and that I was already in the registry, typed and dated from a year before any of it. And I heard her go quiet on the other end, the way a careful person goes quiet when 2 pieces of a long broken thing slide together in front of them. She asked me to read her the date off the card. I read it to her. She was quiet again. "You're already on record," she said. "You've been on record this whole time. Carly, when the family came in asking for relatives to be tested, your name should have populated. Your type was right there." She stopped. Somebody would have had to not look or look and close it. "I know," I said. Then Gwen Dietrich, who had been deceived once in that building and had spent 2 winters refusing to set it down, told me what was going to happen, and she told it to me plainly. There would be a meeting. The program ran them for cases like Whitney's, a family conference, the recipient and her people, and the coordinator and the surgeon all in one room to talk through options when a graft was failing, and the list was long. The Brants had already asked for one. It was on the calendar, and Gwen said, in the same flat voice I use across a counter, that she would be bringing the original directed donation file to that meeting and the redirection form beside it, because a forged donor authorization could not sit in her drawer one more day now that someone had finally asked her the right question. She said the words fraud review and county referral the way you say the names of weather coming in. She said, once it's in the room, Carly, it's in the room. There's no taking it back out. I told her I would be there. She did not ask me what I was going to do. I think she already knew that I did not entirely know myself and that it did not matter, because the room was going to do most of it. All I had to do was come and bring what Ruth left me and sit where they could see me. The meeting was set for a Thursday, 10 days out, at the program in Indianapolis. My mother called twice more in those 10 days, and both times the message was the same song, dressed a little different. They had scheduled a family meeting. They needed me to be there. Whitney needed me to be there. It would mean so much to your sister to see the family together. Not once did Maureen say the words get tested again, and I understood why. Somewhere in those 10 days, somebody at that program had finally typed Whitney's sister into the system, or been told to, and the family had been told what I already knew, that the testing they had been dreading was a year done, and the result was the one they had been praying for and dreading in equal measure. They knew I matched now. They just did not know I knew at first. They did not know about a shoebox or a card in support hose handwriting or 6 words on a manila flap. They thought they were calling me to a meeting. They were calling me to a table I had already set. I took the Thursday off. I told my supervisor it was family, which was true. I put the card and the registry sheet and Ruth's letter back into the manila envelope, and I put the envelope flat into a folder, and I put the folder on the passenger seat where Gwen's question had ridden 10 days before, and I drove State Road 9 North out of Cardwell one more time, past the elevators and the fading water tower and the county roads, 90 minutes up to the city, to a building with gray carpet and gray light and a small conference room at the end of a hall where my whole family was already sitting when I came through the door. They had saved me a chair. That was the first thing I noticed, the way you catch a small wrong detail before the big ones land on you. An empty seat on the near side of a long table, pulled out a few inches and turned toward the head of it, the way you angle a place setting toward the guest of honor. Maureen had her good coat on, the camel one she kept for funerals and for the bank. Dale sat beside her in a collared shirt with the fold lines still pressed into it from the package. His big hardware store hands laid flat on the table like he could not think what else to do with them. Whitney was at the head, thinner than 2 winters should have been allowed to make a person, a scarf knotted high at her throat. And when she lifted her eyes to me, they did the old thing. The warm, helpless opening that used to undo me before I learned to read a face the way I read a label, careful and twice, and to myself. A man in a white coat sat at the far end with a folder closed under his folded hands, and across from him, with a squared stack of files in front of her and a pen laid parallel to the top edge, sat Gwen Dietrich. She did not smile when I came in. She found my eyes once, held them for the length of a breath, and looked back down at her files, and that one look told me she had brought all of it. I took the chair they had saved me. I set my own folder on the table, flat, the soft corner of the manila just showing past the cardboard. Nobody looked at it. They were all looking at my face, waiting to see which version of me had driven up State Road 9 that morning, the one who covered the shifts and the bills, or somebody new they had not been introduced to yet. Maureen started before the surgeon could open his folder. She reached across the corner of the table and put her hand over mine, and her rings were cold. And she said my name twice, the way she did when she wanted a thing to feel settled before it was. Carly. Carly, honey, we are so glad you came. She said the family had to pull together now, that this was bigger than anything that came before, that whatever hard feelings sat between us could be set down for your sister's sake. She said the word sister The way you lay down a card you have been holding all night. Dale cleared his throat and said, low, that they had made mistakes, that nobody was perfect, that a family takes care of its own and always had. He did not look at me when he said it. He looked at his hands, and Whitney, when it came to her, leaned forward with the scarf slipping at her neck and said, please. She said, I know I have no right to ask. She said, you are the only one who can. They told us that. You are the only one. Her eyes were wet, and I believe they were honestly wet. That is the part nobody outside my family ever understood. The feeling was always real in that house. It was only ever pointed the wrong way. I did not answer any of them. I kept my hands still under my mother's cold rings and let them talk, because I learned a long time ago that people will show you the whole shape of a thing if you only give them the quiet to fill it with. And while they filled it, I watched the surgeon, who was not watching them at all. He was watching me, and he had not opened his folder, and there was something patient in his stillness that told me he already knew what was inside it and was only waiting for the room to be ready. When Maureen finally ran down, he opened it. He spoke plainly, the way a man speaks when he has had to carry hard news into small rooms many times. He laid out where things stood. The graft was failing. The wait for a donor through the list was long, and Whitney did not have that long inside the wait. The path with real odds, he said, the best one left, was a living donor whose tissue came up close enough, and they had searched for one. He turned a page. He said the registry held a single living donor whose typing matched stronger than the program usually let itself hope for inside one family, and that this donor had been on record, typed, and entered well before today. He looked up from the page. He read the name printed on it out loud. Carly Brandt. I heard my mother make a sound. Then the camel coat slid sideways and down, and Maureen went to her knees on the gray carpet beside her chair, both palms pressed flat to the floor as if the room had tipped under her, saying my name, then saying oh, then saying nothing at all. Dale half rose and did not catch her. Whitney sat very still with her wet eyes gone wide, looking at me the way a person looks at the back of a door they have walked past their whole life and never once thought to try. Something in me went quiet and went level, the way a needle settles. I reached down and squared the corner of my envelope flush against the edge of the table. Then I waited, because I knew Gwen Dietrich was not finished, and neither was I. Gwen let the surgeon's words sit until they had reached every corner of the room. Then she opened her own stack, and she said in the same flat, steady voice she used to tell coordinators yes or no at 3 in the morning, that before anyone went one step further, there was a record that had to be read into this meeting because she had carried it for 2 winters and would not carry it 1 hour longer. She set out 2 pages, side by side, and turned them so the table could see. The first, she said, was a directed living donation consent, dated the spring before Ruth Brandt passed. A donor had come forward freely, named the person he meant the gift to go to, and signed his own name. The person named on that first page was me. The second page was a redirection authorization, dated 11 days after, that moved the same gift onto a different recipient. The name on that second page was Whitney, and the signature that authorized the change, Gwen said, did not match the donor's own hand on the first page. It did not match it anywhere on the line. I knew that second page. I had first seen it at my own bench, an old consent pulled in a batch for an unrelated audit. The donor's name struck through under heavy marker, and I had photographed it that night with a hand that would not hold steady. Here it lay unredacted under the fluorescent light, the blacked-out name standing clear at last, a quiet man from a church supper, who had once said yes to me by name and never knew his yes had been lifted off the page and set 2 lines down. And then the thing landed that no one at that table had braced for. The thing that turned both winters over in my hands at once. The graft failing inside my sister was that gift. The kidney they were all bent over this table trying to rescue was the one that had been meant for my own body, taken from where a stranger pointed it and given to hers by a hand that signed a name it had no right to. They had not bumped me down a list. They had reached into the place a kind man set aside for me and moved it. And now, the thing they moved had worn through, and they had driven me 90 minutes north to ask for a piece of me directly, because the piece they took the first time had finally given out. Whitney was staring at the 2 pages. Whatever color was left in her face drained out of it. She said, in a voice with nothing performed left anywhere in it, "Mom." She said it again. "Mom, what is this?" And Maureen, still down on the carpet, said the one true thing I ever heard her say in a hard moment. She said, "We kept it in the family. We kept it in the family, Carly. That is all we ever did." And there it was, spoken out loud in front of the surgeon and the coordinator and both her daughters, the whole of it, dressed up one last time in the only word she had ever used for taking. Gwen named what came next the way you name weather coming in low over flat ground. She said this would go to the network that oversees how organs are given in this country, to its fraud review, and that a forged donor authorization was a matter past the walls of any hospital, and that there would be a referral to the county. She said it without heat. She did not need to lift a thing. The 2 pages did the lifting for her. I stood up, not quickly. I picked up my envelope and undid the flap my grandmother had once pressed shut with her own mouth, and I took out the 3 things inside and laid them on the table over the 2 forged pages. Gentle, like covering a false record with a truer one. The typing card with my name, and a date from before any of it. The registry sheet. And Ruth's letter, folded along the creases she had worn into it, which I did not read out and did not need to. I said one thing to the room, and I said it low, because I have never once had to be loud to be heard across a table. I said I was a whole person and not a shelf they could reach a part down off of when a part was wanted. I said whatever I decided, I would decide standing on my own 2 feet, with my name on the deciding, in the open, with the truth already spoken into the air. I said it to my mother on the floor, and my father frozen halfway out of his chair, and my sister with her hand pressed over her mouth. Then I said the rest, and the rest surprised them more than any refusal could have. I said I would be tested properly on the record, and if I matched the way the card said I matched, I would give. Freely, by my own name. Not because the family voice had asked it of me, and not to buy back $1 of what they had spent, but because Ruth had typed me into the world as a person who gets to choose, and so I was choosing. I would give my sister what they once stole for her, and this time the gift would carry a real signature, mine, and the forged page would still go to the review, because a true thing and a just thing can both stand in the same room without canceling out. Whitney started to cry then, not the soft, helpless crying I had spent a lifetime answering, but the other kind, the kind that comes when a person sees clear to the floor of what was done in their name. She did not say thank you. She said I am sorry, which was harder, and which I had never once heard out of her before. The review opened before the month was out. The county filed its referral. And in Cardwell, where everything carries down Main and into the diner on Linden before the coffee goes cold, people came to know that the white 2-story on Sumac Street had been borrowed against twice, and that whatever had once sat behind Dale's counter had gone north to Indianapolis years ago, a little at a time, on bills no one had said out loud. The hardware store locked its door on a Tuesday. There is a different name on the sign over Main now, and the man who hung it keeps the place open on Sundays. Some weeks on, Gwen Dietrich's program changed the way it handled a directed gift. Every redirection runs through a call to the donor now, and a signature laid against the original consent before a single thing is allowed to move. The spring, a family 2 counties over went in asking to send a kidney to a cousin instead. A coordinator picked up the phone and called the donor first, and the donor said no, and the gift went where its owner had pointed it. I never met them. I only saw the line added to the file, the new step that was not there the year they did it to me. I gave my sister the thing only I had. It was done in a room I will not walk you through, kept off stage from all of this, and it healed clean on both sides. And that is all anyone needs of that part. My name is Carly Brandt. I am 30 now, back at my bench in Cardwell, where the centrifuge hums and the labels print one after another, and the work is exactly as honest as the hand that does it. I uncapped my pen and labeled the next sample. Careful, then once more to be sure. The empty envelope lies flat in the pocket of my coat.